lifestyle that I'm aiming for, traveling, and like how I intend on making money and all that stuff. And in this video, what I want to talk about is the whole concept of getting married and starting a family. Now, I want to take a bit of a different perspective from what you may have already been seeing here on YouTube. You know, there's a lot of manosphere channels that talk about like, oh, all women do is sleep around and all that. And so while that is an issue today, you know, infidelity rates are, you know, a lot higher than before. And a lot of that is because of social media and dating apps. I want to take a bit more of a, I guess you could say, long-term approach and just kind of talk about the whole concept of starting a family in general, getting married, and also, you know, just all the other like long-term issues that I see myself running into if I were to get married in the United States, right? Now, this will also, these issues will also be for women as well. So if you are a woman watching this video, then I will, to an extent, defend women, American women specifically in this video, a little bit. You know, in one point that I will make here where I think women actually have it, you know, are having a tough time as well. But overall, I believe that men have it a lot worse in the dating scene in general, right? And so I'll talk about why that is. So of course, when it comes to getting married, there are a lot of risks involved for men specifically. You have the divorce rates being like 50% and up, like half of marriages in the US nowadays end in divorce. Majority of those divorces, 80% of them, are initiated by women. And the way that the system is set up in the US incentivizes women to divorce their husbands. And so I've heard a lot of horror stories from people that I've actually know in person. This isn't just, you know, watching videos online, just, you know, reading about horror stories, but I have heard from a lot of people that I know in person that regret getting married. And so I've had a lot of guys tell me, you know, older guys tell me like, oh, don't ever get married, right? You know, kind of saying it in a joking way. But the more that I kind of observe, you know, what's going on around me, you know, like most relationships that I've seen, there is usually some type of infidelity going on, or there's some type of issue. So that's one thing. However, when you look at the divorce rates and you look at how it's set up, it is very heavily against the men. So a woman can pretty much divorce you at any time. She can get bored, she could cheat on you, and if you have kids with her, then she can just take half of your earnings basically, and even if she's not even supporting the kids. So I've seen a lot of examples of that, and that is definitely a big issue. However, I would say that the primary issue with dating and getting married, and especially with having kids, you know, starting a family altogether, is just the cost of everything. And so I think that men and women will agree with me on this, that the cost of living is way higher than it's ever been in the US. And I don't believe that this is specifically a left versus right issue anymore, because the elites in power are continuing to print trillions of dollars, and that's even after this current, you know, election, you know, this current 4-year cycle. So let's, you know, if we're being 100% honest, is life really that different, you know, now compared to, you know, the previous 4-year span? In my opinion, it's not really that much different, right? So yeah, there might be a few slight, you know, differences here and there, but overall, most Americans in general are still slaving away 40 hours a week at a 9-to-5 job, and they're barely scraping by. And so that's even if you are living alone by yourself. Like in my case, I live, you know, solo at this place, and you know, just working a 40-hour work week job would not be enough for me to live comfortably on my own, let alone supporting an entire family. So before, you know, the man can go to work 40 hours a week, maybe even less than that, and support an entire family, versus now it's just a lot more expensive. And so you really have to be obsessed with making money if you want any shot of raising a family and, you know, not, you know, spending all of your time at work. So the way it's set up is, if you don't go into, you know, starting you know, like a hyper profitable business, or you don't go into a super high paying career, then most likely if you do decide to get married, then you're going to be in a dual income dynamic where both you, the man, and the woman are going to be working 40 hours a week at a job, and that gives you less time to actually spend time with your kids. So that's less time that you have nurturing your kid, and then you gotta worry about hiring like a babysitter. That's a whole other expense that you gotta worry about. And then there is the cost of school, the cost of, clothing, and every other expense that comes with, of course, raising another kid. So it's already expensive in itself to live on your own with just a regular 9-to-5 job. But, trying to start an entire family, I mean, you really got to be obsessed with making money. So the one thing that I will talk about when it comes to, the way the economy is I truly believe that the reason why people aren't socializing as much, and I hear a lot of women complaining about this, how they don't get approached anymore. So, of course, a lot of that has to do with, women's attitude and with social media, boosting up women's egos, and with dating apps, and with women's standards going, a lot higher, demanding a lot more. But the effect of that, that's the cause. The effect of that is going to be, well, men are going to be a lot more obsessed with, things like looks maxing, with making as much money as possible. And when you're constantly spending all of your free time outside of your already busy work life, then that gives you less time to actually go out and meet people. And so, from what I've seen, guys who I've met personally who are really good at, talking to women, they're super charismatic. Oftentimes, those are the same guys that aren't really making that much money, right? Like they're barely making enough to live on their own, or sometimes like their girlfriend makes more money than them. And then I've actually had a friend, a couple of years ago where his girlfriend was very loyal to him. They ended up getting married, but for a while he was not working. And so there were a couple times where he messaged me saying like, "Hey bro, can I borrow like $50?" And of course, every time I just ignore him because I'm like, I don't want to be that person, where if I give you $1, then I'm going to be seen as the guy to ask for money, basically. So yeah, I've met a lot of guys that were like that. They have the good physique. They're more, I guess, social and charismatic than I am, but because that is, their main focus, then they're typically not making as much money. And so on the flip side, I've also met a lot of guys that were, making above average income, but then they lacked in the social department. And so what I see with a lot of women is they want a guy that, has all of those stats up high. They want a guy who's making good money, who's also in really good shape, and who's also super charismatic. And the percentage of guys that meet all of those criterias is very low. We're talking, okay, if you want a guy that makes, 6 figures, for example, that's like 1% of men, basically. Or if you want a guy that's like over 6 feet tall, I'm 6'0", by the way. That's like 1% of men. So I'm technically in the 1% of men in terms of the height metric, but I'm not like the super social person, but I do have like multiple streams of income, for instance. So I have like my 9-to-5 job. I have a couple online income streams. I'm not super wealthy by any means just yet, but that is primarily my main focus. But because it's been my main focus, my social life has definitely suffered as a result of that. So the issue that a lot of women are struggling with is it's very hard to meet a guy that, has all of those standards that you typically want. So you are going to have to, unless if you like happen to be, super beautiful, you have like you won like the gene pool and you're like a 10 out of 10 in looks, then you should not expect the guy you're looking for to have all those metrics raised up. Now, one thing that I will say in defense of women, where I think that women actually are struggling as well, is when you look at the traditional family structure, right, where the man makes money and the woman is like, stays home with the kids, it's a lot harder to achieve that dynamic and be in that feminine role if you are trying to get married in the West today. So what I mean by that is with the cost of living rising up, you kind of have to be obsessed with making money, unless if you happen to find a guy that is earning like, 6 figures or like 7 figures even. It's very hard to actually be in that, role. So unfortunately, you kind of have to be, I kind of get why a lot of women are kind of entering that like, boss babe era. And that just because unless if you're a man that you get, which, a very small percentage of guys that are making like really good money where they could support an entire family, then you are going to need to have some sort of income on your own. So I think that the elites in power have actually screwed women over as well by trying to prop them up and by trying to suppress men as well. So now let's talk about the actual concept of marriage, right? So you get married, and first of all, why are weddings so expensive? Why are we, going into debt for one day when that money should be going towards your kid? Makes no sense to me. And so oftentimes what I see is usually the bigger the wedding is, the higher chance that that marriage is going to end in divorce. That's just something that I've noticed personally. So I think that if you are going to get married, that you should just have like a very small wedding, or maybe just a few of your closest people are invited. I don't think you should go in debt for that, and just try to save as much money on that as you possibly can. There's really no reason to go like all out on like one day specifically, right? So there's that, and then of course you have the cost of raising a kid. And so this is the main issue that I want to really talk about here when it comes to, why I believe that there is really no benefit, especially for men, to get married. But I will say to an extent for women as well, at least in the United States. So there are a lot of roadblocks that you have to jump through when it comes to actually raising a kid. First of all, there's the cost. Then there is the housing crisis, the constant rise of inflation. There's all the division that we have in the West, where they're constantly trying to divide men and women. And then, of course, you have all this propaganda that is being pushed onto young men and young women in school. So first of all, with men, they're trying to feminize men as much as possible. They're trying to keep them, they're trying to overpower women, basically put them in the masculine role and, put men in the feminine role. And then they're trying to, push all of this. I mean, it's not as bad as before with the previous 4 years, but they're trying to basically swap the gender roles around. And so then on top of that, with women, I don't, like, for example, if I were to have a daughter, I would not want her to be raised in an environment that is heavily, promoting like hookup culture. And I don't want her to be surrounded by other women who are encouraging her to sleep around. So with women, there is that herd mentality thing where, typically you want to, fit in with your peers. And if you don't, then you're going to be labeled as a pick-me. So that is one area where I see a lot of women who want to be in that feminine role, who actually want that traditional family structure, who lean more conservative. They struggle to remain in that role because they're constantly being bombarded by their peers to sleep around. And so one other thing that I see often is a woman can be in a happy, healthy marriage, but if her friends get jealous, or if she gets enough comments on social media encouraging her to break up with her husband, which there's a ton of videos out there, then that can very easily influence her mind to follow what other people are saying, and then she will end up sabotaging her relationship and or marriage. So that is one thing that I see happening quite often. So for me, when I look at the long-term aspect of raising kids, I want my son and or daughter, future son and or daughter, to be raised in an environment that is going to encourage them to follow that traditional path, and a environment that is optimized to be easy to, get married and have kids and all that, right? So in America, I don't believe that, I'm not, trying to talk bad on the US. I do believe it's the best place to make money. However, when it comes to actually raising a family, I don't believe that this is the best optimized environment to actually get married and start a family. And that's just because of how the elites are dividing everyone and how everything is set up. So personally for me, I don't see myself getting married at all or having kids in the US. And if I ever do, it will most likely be in another country where the roles are much more traditional. And I'm not saying that other countries are, better entirely and everything's perfect. And I'm not saying that women overseas are better. I'm not saying anything about, American women versus European or Asian women. Instead, I'm looking at this from the perspective of the long-term effect of raising kids. The environment that they're being raised in, is it more traditional where they promote family, values, or is it just more promoting degeneracy, hookup culture, and just encouraging everyone to sleep around? So that is what I ultimately look at most of all. And when you factor in, cost of living in a lot of these other countries now, especially like Eastern Europe, it's a lot more, although the locals aren't making as much money as Americans. I would say that in many of these other countries nowadays, they actually have more spending power compared to Americans, and it's a lot easier to achieve that traditional family structure compared to the US, where everyone has to just be obsessed with making money 24/7. So, again, I'm not trying to say it's perfect everywhere, but that's just from what I've seen personally. And so, although dating and marriage is going to have its risks anywhere that you go, and there's scams everywhere, I truly see myself taking much less of a hit if a relationship or marriage doesn't go well in another country compared to the US. I'm taking much higher risk getting married in the West. And so you could very easily make the argument of like, oh, well, women in other countries are gold diggers. They just want your money. They want your passport. And so, yes, that can be the case in oftentimes as well, but isn't that the risk you take anywhere you date? Especially when you take into consideration, American women, they want, a guy that makes 6 or 7 figures, and they're always looking for that guy that has money, basically. So there's a risk that you take anywhere that you go. And I truly believe that the best option for young men specifically is you want to have multiple income streams online that enable you to live anywhere in the world. And so when you have location freedom, then you could decide when and where to set up another home base, to get married, and just live in an environment where there's a lot more peace, there's less animosity towards one another, and it's just a lot easier to raise a family. So for women, I actually think that women can benefit from raising a family overseas as well. And I'm not saying that you have to necessarily get married overseas, but let's say that you happen to find a guy in the US and you have a great thing going, then I would definitely recommend that both you and your husband work together to build income streams online and consider having another home base outside of the US so that you can raise a family a lot more easily, and you're not having to constantly stress, work as much, because you don't need to make like 7 figures to live like a basic life, basically. So that unfortunately seems to be the reality for most Americans nowadays, and why less people are dating, why less men are approaching women nowadays. And a lot of that also has to do with the fact that, there's false allegations you could run into and just the entitlement and all that. But I don't want to believe that all women in the US are bad. So I try to remain as optimistic as I possibly can. And I believe the best thing that you could do is always work on yourself, always focus on making money, especially online, so you could have location freedom. And even if you decide not to move overseas, maybe you decide to live in a smaller town where the cost of living is a lot lower and the online income that you have built up allows you to live there comfortably. So that is my personal viewpoint on getting married in the US and why I don't really see it being worth it in the long run. So let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of this? Do you agree or disagree with me? If there's anything that I said that you disagreed with, where you thought I was completely wrong, then let me know in the comments. Share your honest perspective as well. If you have been married before, share your experience and why you might have walked away from the dating scene altogether, or why you might also be looking into the same thing as me as well, as far as like going overseas and all that. So I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts down below. Give this a thumbs up. And if you want to check out exactly what I'm doing to earn an income online and, build up a few online income streams, then you could check out the free training that I have linked down below. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and take care. See you in the next one.